Good morning, everyone. My name is Shauna Lawson. I'm the Director of Research and Social Innovation here at Via Sport British Columbia, and I want to begin by acknowledging that while you're logging in from, in some cases, across the province in the Lower Mainland, we're hosting this town hall on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. This town hall series was really inspired by a webinar we hosted on June 4th that had over 1,000 people register, and a lot of people sending us emails and calling us, seeing if they could sneak in the back door. And so we had hundreds of questions submitted during that hour. And that to us showed us two things. One, there's a ton of people across the province who are incredibly passionate about getting sport back to our communities in a way that is safe and puts the needs of the participants first and their safety first. And two is that there was a lot of unanswered questions. And so the agenda for today, we're really not going to spend a ton of time going in granular detail through the return to sport guidelines, which you can find at viasport.ca, or BCRPA's return to activity guidelines, which you can find at bcrpa.bc.ca. Those documents are there. Really, this call is about filling in those gaps and those gray areas and answering your questions. So we'll begin with a short introduction from each of the panelists so you get to know them. Jared Cope, our Director of Provincial Activation, will then bring you up to speed on everything we know about the return to sport process. The rest of the time is questions. And so some people have pre-submitted questions. We appreciate you taking the time to do that. But otherwise, we'll encourage everyone to enter their questions at the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. So you'll see a Q&A button. If you press that, you can type your questions in at any time, and we'd encourage you to do so. And that's the way that I'll get questions to the panelists. So keep your questions coming throughout, and we'll do our best to answer as many, if not all of them. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the panelists to introduce themselves. Let's start with you, Jared.
Hi, everyone. Really great that you could be with us today. My name is Jared Cope, and representing Via Sports. Myself and a colleague, Heather Beatty, and a couple others have been really trying to lead this return to sport work for the province, and hope that we can give some clarity to the process and answer some of your questions today. And really glad that you were able to join us.
Thanks, Jared. Stephanie, do you want to go next?
Sure. I'm Stephanie Key. I'm the Deputy Director of Parks, Recreation and Culture with the District of Mission. Been in the field for numerous years. We have a sports council that I work very closely with in our community. That's an advocate and a support for sport. So doing a lot of work with them at this point in time as well.
Thanks, Stephanie. Glenn, do you want to go next?
Sure. Glenn Mitchell with the City of Port Coquitlam, Recreation Manager. Similar to Stephanie, been in the business a long time. We too, similar to Mission, have a sports alliance group that we work directly with that is organizing our local sport organizations, and we're working closely together with them. We've been in constant contact with all of our local groups really since we went into phase 2 and knew that there was a potential of sport coming back. We've hosted 3 Zoom meetings with them and kept them in the loop of what will be coming down the pike and what will be required in order to return to sport. So it seems to have been really fluid so far.
Thanks, Glenn. I think that's, one of the key words is fluid. The target is continually moving. So we feel that as well. And then Michael, last but not least, we'll turn to you.
Good morning, everybody. Happy to be here, and happy that so many of you guys are joining us as well. I'm with the Vancouver Park Board. My name is Michael Mersek, and I'm the Sport and Wellness Supervisor for the Park Board. In that capacity, I oversee the fitness centers, the arenas, as well as the outdoor sport facilities. And much like my colleagues Stephanie and Glenn in Vancouver, we're fortunate to be working with the Vancouver Field Sport Federation, which is a great organization that includes about 40,000+ participants that utilize our sport fields. So we've been closely in touch with them, as well as our permit holders, which there is more than 1,000 of. Really looking forward to working with them and yourselves to activate our fields again.
Thanks, Michael. Yeah, we so appreciate you all being on the call, and again, speaks to the many number of people who are keen to get sport back to our communities. So before I turn it over to Jared, I just want to, again, encourage folks to be writing their questions in the Q&A box, and you can do so now. That'll help us make sure that we get to them. If you see me furiously writing, I'm not doodling on the side. I am taking your questions down, and I wanted to acknowledge we did already have a great comment about Jared winning the COVID-19 Best Beard Award. So important stuff coming in that Q&A box. Please keep them coming. And with that, Jared, you go ahead, take it away.
Yeah, Larry, I've been getting a lot of I need another haircut, but I've been getting a lot of those comments too. My COVID hair, so no, I appreciate it. We're going to talk a little bit about the process, and I'm not going to go into detail of the first parts of it, but VIA Sport did release the sector-wide return to sport guidelines almost a month ago now, in early June, and then from there, the provincial sport organizations either we're finalizing or starting to develop their sport-specific return to sport guidelines. When they're ready, those provincial sport organization board of directors approved those plans, and that is when then the local clubs could develop their return to sport plans. And so once so again, the PSO, the provincial sport organization, would release theirs, and then the local sport organization could then develop their plans. Currently, we have about 40 of our provincial sport organizations that have developed and have board approved plans. You can find those at viasport.ca, and you can also find our return to sport guidelines as well at viasport.ca. So once then the plans are released, the local sport organization will adopt their plan and also get board approval from their local board of directors, and then can start implementing based off of the guidelines set provincially. Every organization does need to have a COVID-19 safety plan that's legislated from the province. So that's not just in the sports sector. Your local sport organization, return to sport plan can act as that COVID-19 safety plan if it meets the criteria, or there could be two separate documents. But you do need to have a safety plan in place that is available to the public. As you know, a lot of the provincial sport organizations and their sport-specific guidelines have a template of how to build that plan. VIA Sport also has a template in the appendix of our sector-wide guidelines as well. So that's the process of return to sport, and also needing to ensure at the end of the day that we're following the public health orders. I would also say in the process, it's been really important to work with municipalities and facility operators, and so I really appreciate having the three other panelists on board for this, because sport doesn't happen without facility access, and municipalities play a massive role in that. I also would like to say we have also been working really closely with BCRPA. They have developed their return to activity guidelines and been working with their members, which is of all of the municipalities in BC. So there is a lot of alignment between our structures, and we'll continue to work together. I always say if sport's ready to go, but the facility isn't open, then sport doesn't happen. If the facility is open but the sport groups aren't ready to go, sport doesn't happen. So there needs to be a marrying of those two processes, ensuring the safety of our community. So a sport plan might need to add in a few different more elements if that's what the municipality or the facility operator is asking for, and vice versa. So that's just a really key component of a return to sport.
Thanks, Jared. And we are getting some questions coming in, some related to sort of that process, and some more specific. So with that, we'll dive right in, and again, encouraging folks, no questions too small, too detailed, too silly. Please ask them all. It's important. We all need clarity. So the first question, and most of these I think are going to come your way, Jared, so you're in the hot seat. But a couple of days ago, Dr. Bonnie Henry announced we're in phase 3. So I'm wondering, can you update folks on what that means for sport specifically? And then I've got a follow-up coming from that Dan submitted.
Yeah, absolutely. So the short answer of that, with us moving into phase 3, doesn't move sport forward. We are in the same phase as we were 4 days ago. So Shauna, if you don't mind, if you could pull up the sport activity chart and share that screen, that'd be great. With phase 3 announcement, that is really opening more doors in our province for other sectors to start coming back online, but the same measures are in place. We just we were introduced in phase 2 for sport and recreation to come back. So all still applies to what we were before the announcement of phase 3. We are still in transition measures, which is the yellow column. Physical distancing is a must in everything that we do. We are still wanting to, outdoor is safest. Indoor facilities are slowly coming back online and reopening, but that's where all the planning needs to come in place. We're still we are saying that there's no contact sport. In club player modified games can be slowly introduced, but also saying that we are working really closely with the province and the public health office to understand how we can slowly introduce or reduce the barriers to competition or play in general. So we are working to define that right now, but as it stands, we are still in transition measures and will be for the next while. I do also want to say that this isn't a switch. We are going to be moving quite slowly through these measures, and something that we need to keep in mind, that as a phase is announced for the province, that doesn't mean that we just switch quickly.
I appreciate that. And maybe just to follow up from Dan, so what does that mean in terms of team travel, especially within the Lower Mainland Fraser Valley region?
That means that we should still be going within our communities at first. Competition isn't there for most sports. And so we might touch on that later. I'm sure there'll be questions about that. But right now, it should still be within your community or within your club, and that's where we're at the phase we're at right now. And we'll communicate differences as we transition slowly. But that's where we are.
Awesome. Thanks, Jared. So the questions are rolling in. Please keep them coming. So maybe we'll send it over to our municipal rec folks. So similar question for you around timing. So can you give people on the line an idea of, how you're working to open your facilities, and if you have any information on timing for that? And maybe Stephanie, if you're okay, we'll start with you again.
Sure. We don't have a time frame for facilities such as indoor pools, arenas, curling rinks, that sort of thing yet. The fields outdoor space, we're hoping that we may be able to have some bookings come in July. We are working with those groups that would typically book our fields. We know they're working on their safety plans and so forth. So we don't have a date at this point, but we anticipate hopefully something on the fields during the summer here.
Appreciate that. Thanks. Glenn, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, we once we opened up our playgrounds and spray parks, essentially at the end of May, we made a conscious effort to reopen our sports fields for family use at the beginning of June. And then as we got to about June 15th, we've opened it to minor sport groups as the guidelines became available and our minor groups started compiling their work on their plans. So as of today, we have approximately 6 permits out with minor sport groups that are, as of this weekend, about 5 of them will be actually out on the fields playing. Similar to Mission 2, where this is strictly just outdoors. Our indoor facilities at this time will remain closed and to be reassessed later this summer for what fall might look like.
Thanks, Glenn. And Michael, do you want to talk about City of Vancouver?
Definitely. So for us, in terms of the outdoor amenities, we opened up the sports fields on May 31st for recreational use, and recently we had an approval from the city to open up all our outdoor sport facilities, fields, diamonds, on July 1st for permitted use. So we're sort of in a mad dash to the finish line to permit as much as we can. We're anticipating out of our many hundreds of users, about 70 to 80% of them return to sport as of July 1st, and in the sort of trickling in the first couple of weeks of July. We're also opening the outdoor aquatics facilities, some of them mid-July, with amended use. And then we're working towards the reopening plans for indoor amenities like arenas, fitness centers, and community centers, but we don't have a date in place yet.
No, that's helpful. And I think, you know, the putting safety first, it seems like, you know, not rushing to open the doors. And maybe a follow-up from Dave for you, Jared. Is there any thought about a Via Sport-led advocacy campaign targeted at municipalities that are dragging their feet at opening facilities due to budget priorities? So any thoughts on that one?
No, we won't be advocating that. The complexity of each municipality is deep, and something that, you know, we don't want to act like we are experts in, and knowing what they are going through and the pressures that they're feeling in a lot of different lanes. So, you know, we all want to see sport return, we all want to see activity return, but how we do that is going to be different in each municipality. So Via Sport won't be advocating for and pressuring municipalities to return, because we don't understand some of what they're going through.
Thanks, Jared. So let's talk a little bit about the approval process. And I know you spoke about this in the beginning, Jared, but just want to clarify some questions coming through. Does a local sport organization need to submit their plans to their PSO or to Via Sport?
It's a good question. And so every provincial sport organization has a different structure, a governance structure. So there are some provincial sport organizations that have that in place, where they'll want to review and approve a plan. That is the case there. I would say that is a smaller percentage, though. For the most part, you will not need approval from a provincial body. Via Sport will not be approving any plan from a local sport organization. We're not approving the provincial sport organization return to sport plans either. So in terms of approval, you do need it from your local sport organization board of directors. That is an approval process. And then some PSOs will be asking for those plans, but it's a smaller percentage.
Okay, appreciate that. And then maybe a follow-up from Ron. What about non-organized sport groups? So his example is a hockey group, Ice Time in Surrey for non-contact hockey. Do I need to come up with a plan? Maybe who needs to approve it? And any chance we'll be able to play come September?
I'm not going to be able to speak to the any chance you can play in September part. That again, that will depend on where we are in terms of the actual sport, and you know, where we are in our phases will depend. But I can't speak to your municipality and if they'll have the facilities open or not. In terms of the approval for that group, we do hope that you are following hockey's guidelines. Even if you are not a member, they are available to you to build out your plan. Every municipality, every group is going to need safety plan. So yet you're going to need to develop one. It's just a matter of how you get to developing one is up to you if you're not part of a provincial sport organization, but I still would lean on them to get that information and support. The other thing I would add is most municipalities that I've worked with and talked to are wanting to see that plan submitted as part of the rental agreement. It's up. Every municipality is different, and in terms of that approval or non-approval or submission. But most are looking for that safety plan to be submitted as part of the agreement of using their facilities.
Thanks, Jared. And just one more follow-up on that sort of approval. Can you speak about the role of health authorities in approval?
Yeah, it's a good question. Health is integral in this process. They are setting the public health office is really setting the rules and regulations of what we're not allowed to do and what we are allowed to do. We then need to sportify them as a sector, but the actual on ice, on field, on in air activity of your sport doesn't need to be approved from health, and they shouldn't be approving those activities. That is they aren't experts in the sport specific part of it. They are experts in health, and so we need to work in collaboration on that. But from a local sport organization, you should be looking to your sport specific guidelines to develop your plan of what you shouldn't be doing and shouldn't be looking for health for those specific activities.
Okay, thanks. I hope added some clarity there for folks asking questions related. Let's move on to oversight now. So Jared, we'll start with you, and then I'll ask each of the municipalities just talk about what they'll be doing in terms of what they're requiring of sport organizations and that oversight piece. So Jared, who's responsible for oversight and ensuring that sport organizations are following their plans? We've got some folks saying, quite frustrated seeing different groups moving ahead. What are the consequences there? So can you address the oversight?
Yeah, there isn't a straightforward answer here, but there are some mechanisms in place. Everyone, as I've said, everyone needs to have a plan. They need to follow that plan, and there are organizations like WorkSafe BC that can check in on that plan. If you are a not-for-profit sport organization under the ministerial order of making sure in coverage of COVID-19, in that ministerial order, it does explicitly say that you need to be following VIA Sport guidelines, return to sport guidelines, and your sport specific guidelines. So if you are not covered by this ministerial order. I would also say that as part of your sport group, there should be pressure and from the board of directors to implement what we are saying are the guidelines, and there are ways, and I'll turn it over to the municipal representation for this, but we don't want to see public shaming of it, but we also want to understand when people aren't following the guidelines, and that it might be that they don't know them or whatever the reason is, but we do want to, there is a public education part of all of this that needs to be built into how we deliver sport.
Okay, thanks, Jared. I'll turn it over to Recreation if anyone wants to start in terms of what are you requiring from sport organizations, and then what's the process if they're not following the guidelines or their return to sport plans or safety plans. So I don't want to put anyone on the spot. So if anyone wants to start, feel free to just take yourself off mute and dive.
I'll jump in. In Mission, we're working through it, but the group will have to complete a regular booking contract as they would. We're adding an addendum to that contract that they will sign. It's a COVID addendum. And the addendum has things in it, awareness about COVID still exists. There's an informed consent part to the addendum. It talks about having to have a safety plan in place on site, having to train all the volunteers, participants in that safety plan, whether it be a coach or groups associated or people associated with the sport out there. And then, and all the other things that are out there that are typically out from the ministry. We're also having them having to post a notice, a COVID terms and conditions notice at the site of play. So if it's a sports field, it's a bit of a one-pager that says this group has filed a safety plan. They're permitted to be on this field at this time. It's got information they will be following these type of things that are in their addendum and agreement. It's signed. It says that they're training all their participants and so forth in that plan. And the idea with that is that it's a visual reminder on site for the group that has booked and has been approved to use the space, but it's also a visual reminder for the general public walking by. And they see a group out there that that it is planned, approved to be, approved booking, and that they have a safety plan in place. So we are requiring the safety plans to be submitted to us as well. We are looking through them more from the perspective of how it impacts us in the operations side, making sure they're obviously following the guidelines. But for example, if it has an impact on one group coming following another and our operations or maintenance pieces, we're not going to dive into a lot of the detail of the actual sport activity, but we want to just make sure that our staff can manage the site safely as well. We have requirements from WorkSafe to protect our staff and follow guidelines. So that's a piece of the puzzle from our end.
Appreciate that, Stephanie. Glenn, do you want to weigh in?
Yeah, very similar to what Mission. Yeah, very similar to what Mission has done. We've done the same as an addendum to the permit. The one on top of what Mission has done, we've also added a component where we've created our own safety plan for our parks, sports fields, and sports courts. And so all the safety plans have to reference that mitigation plan. The city's issued one that was approved by our department head team. And therefore they will initial in the permit too, that they understand our permit, our mitigation plan, and will follow it, and they follow their own. So the onus is on the sport group to make sure that they follow their plan. In terms of governing it, it's going to be an honor system. They're going to have, they just have to understand that if we receive complaints about plans not being followed, that we will have to follow up with them. And potentially if it continues, that we would have to pull the permit at that time. So not that we would ever get there, but it's kind of a governance model that they're aware of going into, that we highly encourage them to have their plans on place. You never know who's going to show up to the park, and we'll ask to see their plan, whether it be a WorkSafe officer or your local health authority, whether they show up or not. So we'll be working with our groups to ensure they have those in place. And obviously park signage, just letting you know that these parks are for use, and they will be rental user groups using them. We also did a public service announcement out to the public, knowing that sport is back and that groups have followed the proper steps and processes and have plans in place. So the public are aware of that now, that they are being used. So, and again, we're learning as we go.
Yeah, I've said so many times, I think this is our fourth town hall and umpteenth webinar, and the number of times I've said, we've never been here before. We hope we'll never be here again, but it is new for everyone. But I think that sort of oversight sounds consistent. Michael, did you want to add anything around City of Vancouver?
Sure. So in terms of the requirements, nothing out of the ordinary in Vancouver. We're requiring everybody to go through the permitting process. We didn't amend our permits or added any addendums. We worked with our legal team, and they determined that our current permits are sufficient. Of course, each group needs to provide their insurance to us as well. And agree that their return to sport guidelines are developed and available, and they are based off of the provincial sport organizations approved guidelines if applicable. We've done a number of social media engagements as well, just to educate the public that the sports are back. And in terms of the oversight, we trust that all, if not all, 99% of the groups are coming back in good faith. They're really excited to be back on the fields. And from the plans that we've reviewed, they really are planning to go above and beyond what's required. So, we're enthused about that as well. But with saying that, of course, we've communicated our expectations, and we do have the ability to revoke any permits in case that someone is not following or severely breaking the requirements or rules that they set up in their return to sport plans.
That's helpful, Michael. And I think, as I said, our fourth webinar, and every municipality has said the same thing. We don't have the staff. It's not our intention to police. And yet, if there's complaints, then we'll have to follow up. So a great alignment across the province. Jared, next question to you. There's a number of questions. I'll start, and then I'll add in some follow-ups. So the ministerial order around protection for nonprofits who are following their safety plans. Can you talk a little bit? There was a new announcement, I think it was Friday. Can you update people on where that's at? And then I'll ask you a few follow-ups that are coming up through the chat.
Yeah, just that the ministerial order, when it was announced, one of the biggest questions that we received after that was, well, it's during the Emergency Act. What happens after the Emergency Act is over? And the province can only extend that 2 weeks at a time. So it's very difficult for sport organizations to plan and lift their organizations and get moving. And then what happens if it's shut down? So it is a great question and concern, and a very valid one. The announcement this week from the province that there's a new legislation on the table. It's not been passed yet, but the announcement really, it shows the direction the province is going for all ministerial orders, which the sports sector falls under this one. But one of the lines that I keep referring to, we don't have the answers of what it specifically looks like, but this is from the Attorney General. British Columbians can be confident that these emergency orders will not end abruptly the moment the declaration of state of emergency ends. They will have adequate notice to prepare. So right now they're looking to extend to 45 or 90 days, but then also look at what is the long-term solution. So that you can, when the Attorney General is saying that, I feel confident that they're moving in the right direction to make sure that we are all safe going forward during this pandemic past the Emergency Act.
That's great. And a specific question from Dan, does the act apply to private sport organizations?
No, this is for not-for-profit sport organizations, their board of directors and officers that would have been at risk. So this is for those individuals.
And then just a comment, I know you can see Steve's question here about this new 90-day addendum. The problem is, if you ask insurance brokers, they'll tell you that it will likely be years before insurance companies retract their exclusions. Will or has VS Sport addressed this with the provinces? So where are you at with this, and where do you see this going?
Steve, why you ask such long questions? No, I know Steve. But, what's the question?
Just basically that, so we've got this 90-day extension, but what's the sort of interaction with that and these insurance companies who are not likely to retract their exclusions?
Yeah, no, that's a fair comment, Steve, and something that will be part of. We don't have any answers. There's a lot of questions that were raised with this announcement. I'm happy that the announcement was brought up this quick and that it is at the top of the food chain. But part of that will be a lot more questions that are raised and answers that are needed. So we don't know the details of any of that yet, but we know that they're working on it.
Okay, great. Let's dive into the nitty-gritty of the guidelines now, starting, Jared, with the maximum of 50 people. So Well, it seems straightforward. It's actually quite complex depending on the size. So can you just clarify, is the 50 people per diamond per facility? We've had a question about, hockey in the lounge versus on the ice yesterday. So can you just clarify what is meant by that 50 people max?
Yeah, it's 50 people gathering. So and I actually want to start by saying the most important part of this is that, are you able to physically distance? And if you are able to physically distance, that should set your number. But it is to a max of 50 within a gathering. So an example that Shauna brought up is, if you are on a diamond, that there's a complex of 4 diamonds, there can be 50 people per diamond if there is clear space for an entry and exit for those diamonds, where there wouldn't be an opportunity for people to congregate and not be able to physically distance. So there needs to be clear paths for those people to enter and exit, and then be able to gather of a max of 50 if you're able to physically distance. Same thing with facilities. If you are able to, if you have a gym and a pool as well as an arena in a facility, that doesn't mean that you can only have 50 people within the building. It means that you can have 50 people in a gathering in parts of the building if you're able to physically distance, and you're able to move people in and out of those spaces while being able to physically distance. The last one I'd say is, there's some areas. So if you think of a large facility or a mass area, you're able then to create different groups of 50 in that space. So again, with the ability to move in and out of that space while physically distanced. So that's, I hope, gives clarity to the 50 rule.
Appreciate that. A few follow-ups. So one from Dan, speaking about, does phase 3 change the number of participants in one field use unit? So not entirely sure, Dan, if you want to clarify, is this a phase 3, the BC restart plan, or phase 3 for Via Sport? But Jared, any thoughts on that in terms of maybe what for sport?
Every provincial sport organization, every sport has a different risk tolerance, and there's so many factors that play into their sport of what their groupings and their comfort level. So there isn't going to be a clear guideline of, baseball is 10. I'm assuming that's what you're talking about. That might move up as we progress, but we've also, a lot of sports have started small to get an understanding of how it works, and then we'll build in afterwards. And so that doesn't change. There is an upper limit of 50. Every sport then took on what they're comfortable with, and that will progress as well with success and being able to clearly implement and people feeling safe.
And just another follow-up. I'm sorry, I feel like I'm grilling you a little bit, but you did sign up for this. So just a follow-up in terms of seeing differences between private facilities and what local sport organizations are facing. So how do you reconcile the rules that community organizations are subject to with the rules that some private organizations are applying? For example, some are moving ahead with 4-on-4 hockey.
It's a good question and a complex one. Every organization needs to follow the public health order in BC. Private facilities are inherently moving faster than others because of the systems that they have compared to the public system. That's just the reality of what it looks like. But everyone does need to follow the public health order. In terms of the actual activities on play, like we do go to the sport specific guidelines set by the PSO. And so for that example, 4-on-4 hockey should not be played at this time. That's what is being suggested from BC Hockey, and that's what we think should be followed. I'll leave it there.
That's great. Appreciate that. And last one on sort of the the 50 people in the physical distancing, and I'll open this up to any partners in recreation that might want to speak to what their municipality is doing. But from Steve, does that mean that each diamond has to have its own exit or entrance? Would we stagger start and end times? Would that be good enough? So maybe Jared, start with you in terms of what the guidelines say, and then any of the municipal partners, if you want to jump in.
Yeah, just, every you need to be able to get creative in how to move people in and out systematically so that they aren't congregating, and you're running the risk of all 4 diamonds needing to exit out of one small entry at the same time, because that will bottleneck, and that is against the order. So everyone's getting really creative in how they do that, depending on their space, their size, the resources available. So I don't want to speak to the specifics of it. I can speak generally that that needs to be considered, and it should be mitigated. Like you can't have people congregating.
Any of our recreation partners want to talk about what they're doing in terms of that entry and exit to some of the outdoor facilities?
I can go first this time, though. I don't
Thanks,
have
Michael.
I don't have a lot of information on this, unfortunately. But my point of view or my thought is that there was a reason why there was a preference given to outdoor spaces, and just knowing the layout of our outdoor sport facilities, there's usually, if not always, a lot of open space. So I'm just gonna echo Jared's comments, and that's the way we look at it, is for the user groups to follow the orders and getting creative. Typically, like I said, a lot of open space. So as long as groups are working with each other and not encroaching on each other's space, just you're really using common sense and the rules that they set forward in their return to sport guidelines. It's been said a few times, we don't have the capacity to have ushers or staff at every field, so we trust that every group is being creative and following the orders. But this one should be relatively simple to follow.
I would agree with that too as well. We're fortunate where we don't have multi-facility parks, so it's easy for us for most of our user groups to follow their own plan and not cross paths with other user groups. We would hope that those user groups would be cognizant of other groups in the parks and make sure that they do follow their plans. And if they need to change because they're finding there's a potential for congregation to happen, then they would need to adjust those appropriately, or be cognizant of who else is in the park too as well.
You're on mute.
Man, it's got to happen at least once. Just Stephanie, if you wanted to add anything here.
Not really. I mean, very similar. I think their safety plans, they need to be looking at that to meet that requirement. I think on the fields, there's perhaps some good opportunity to do that, and a way to do that. And being aware, even when we're booking groups, we'll look at how we book, for example, as well. And look at perhaps staggering some of those bookings to help mitigate that as well. So, yeah.
Yeah, just to follow up on that too, and something that we've done is we've built in buffer zones between user groups. So we have those half-hour blocks where we'll close the field down to allow one group to leave and another group to show up. That's between separate user groups. So you had a field lacrosse versus soccer. Soccer would then be able to have their own plan where they would have a buffer zone between their own user groups. So, and we built those buffer zones into our bookings too.
I appreciate the detail there. Thanks, Glenn. So we've got 15 minutes left, and there's 2 sort of big groups of questions that are coming up that I want to make sure we get to, but we'll encourage people to please continue to put your questions in. The first, Jared, is around competitions and gameplay. So can you clarify, should competition be taking place right now? And then I have a number of follow-ups.
Yeah, this is a topic that everyone wants answers for, and right now, I think public feels like they are for the most part ready for it, but we just aren't quite there yet. So competition is not recommended at this time. There are some specific examples that competition can be built in that do make sense in a club play or an inter-club play. Tennis, for example, that has physically distance built in, and if it's within your own club, competition can happen. But rugby, that can't happen right now of what it looked like pre-COVID. So we are still saying that competition should not be happening at this time. But I just want to add that we are having those conversations with health and to understand more and have more clarity on what the next of will look like in return. So we are in those conversations and looking to get more clarity, but at this time, competition should not happen for the most part.
Okay, and then a follow-up from Rebecca. Gameplay game is allowed, or are there more, or are more general guidelines better?
I don't know if it's a better or worse comparison. Every PSO has gone a different way. Some have been very specific in what activities that they should be doing and given very clear direction for their clubs and coaches, so that there's no gray. Others have left it a little bit more up to their coaches to develop those plans based off more general guidelines. So one's not better than the other. Some people don't want to get prescribed exactly what to do, and others are looking for those answers. So I can't really speak to which one's better, and I've seen both ways.
And then a follow-up from Alex. Some sports seem to be allowing up to 40 participants and playing games, while other sports are allowing many less players and strict no competition rules. It seems to be creating an unfair environment for those who are being more responsible. Can you comment?
Alex, that's a tough one. Yeah, I did sign up for this. Hey, Shauna. It's a fair point, and I think we don't want to hold people back in playing sport. This is the first time in my career that I feel like I feel like I'm the one who's trying to hold people back, and everything has always been about wanting to play the sports, and everyone wants that. We just need to do it in a really safe way, and sport is inherently different than other parts of our province and our society coming back, because we are in each other's space. So we have to get this right. And so what and some sports they've set their guidelines within our quite broad guidelines. Some have gone quite conservative and strict and will progressively loosen because they want to get it right, and that's what we have advised and suggested. And others haven't. And then we've talked about the public versus private sphere as well. There shouldn't be 40 people in a space where people can't physically distance and play a game. That just shouldn't be happening right now, and we advise against it. And so that I don't know if I've answered it explicitly, but that is our stance.
I appreciate that. The next sport. So can you define exactly what
we mean by contact is coming into the 2 meter space of someone, and it is not allowed right now. That's the short answer of it. Is there circumstances where you are moving by someone and you're in their space and then leave their space? That stuff's going to happen, and that's okay. Are you able to really try to minimize and limit that? That should be the first priority. But contact, really, it means coming into that 2 meter bubble of someone.
And Kabir asked the question 3 minutes after we started, being very patient. But for sports such as wrestling, judo, or jiu-jitsu, what's the best way to manage contact with partners in this next phase? Training with a single partner only, small group of designated partners? Any advice there?
Yeah, to be, I would check in with the sport specific plans, because I don't want to speak out of turn of what they have explicitly put into their plans. And so, the first iteration in the plans that a lot of them I've seen, again, I can't speak for all, has been a lot more of a dry land training, in grappling um, with mats or weights or whatever that may be, instead of individuals. That will be slowly introduced in ways of, maybe it's part of that person's social bubble or whatever that may be. But I can't speak to the timelines of it, and every sport's going to be different within that contact realm of those sports.
And then a follow-up from there, what about the in-between activities such as stick-on-stick checking or incidental contact while play?
Yeah, so it should be to a minimum, and the incidental contact, like I said earlier, it happens, but we still want to create environments where that is minimized.
Okay, appreciate that. And then we've got a few more minutes for some questions, so I'm going to sort of rapid fire here at you, Jared. What about 4-on-4 hockey and outdoor lacrosse box roller hockey? It's a recreation group, not a league. If not, how about 3-on-3?
Negotiation, okay. At this point, we still advise that you're following the provincial sport organization's plan that closely resembles yours. So I'm assuming that would be hockey in your case. And I'm getting these questions actually from municipalities as well, what they're comfortable with in some of these unaffiliated members, but they don't want to set a precedent of opening the door for one group that's different than the other group. So I would probably say it's a little early for those activities, and start to follow hockey's guidelines on it. And then in terms of leagues, what's required of individual leagues, and would the facility that they're playing in cover the leagues that are participating in that facility? From Mark. Yeah, Mark, this is a really good question, and I think we'll take it away and build it into our FAQ. But my first, when I hear it, because I haven't actually thought about this through, is that the more the better. So if you have a safety plan, I think it would go a long way. But I don't actually know the specifics of that. So I'll take that one away and try to get that into our FAQ document.
Great. And then a quick question for you, Stephanie. For Mission, do you think we'll be skating on the ice for September?
Good question. I don't know that answer yet. Honestly, we're still working through items and how we can do that. So we don't have a date at this point. I know that's not much of an answer, but we really don't. We've got a lot of hurdles to jump through, and we're being cautious like everybody else. So that doesn't prevent, though, the sport group or the ice user to still work on their plan. Think through that. And then when we're in that position to actually put ice in and move forward, hopefully you'll be able to move a little quicker.
Yeah, and I know sitting on these town halls with Jared at previous days, he's been asked similar questions like, when will we see football back? When will we see? And the only thing we know right now is that it's very uncertain and we don't know what's coming. So so I just want to give everyone an opportunity to close, but there is, Larry has submitted a follow-up around, for Parks and Recreation leaders, what are you doing to help bridge and build ties between recreation staff and LSOs? So I don't want to put everyone on the spot, but if anyone wants to respond.
Well, I can speak to that a little bit. The formation of our sports council a number of years ago, that was one of the main goals of it, was to have that connection with our LSOs. I, as a staff member, sit on that sports council. So, and work closely with them. So I think that's one way we try and work together on this stuff. We're a smaller community, perhaps somewhere like Vancouver. Perhaps it's a little easier, We see people. We have one facility, one large facility. Everything goes through it. So we know our groups quite well as a result of that. Or one main facility. Obviously, field facilities are separate. But
and just to follow up to Stephanie there, it's part of our mandate to build our relationships with our community groups. So we feel that's very important as we have the facilities, they're using the facilities, and those relationships are a requirement to move everyone together in a common goal. Similar to Stephanie, I also sit on our Sport Alliance. We actually have a counselor that sits on there and advises too. So those relationships are, for us, is very important and a requirement from top down.
I'll go last this time. Now, as Stephanie alluded to, for the size of our municipality, it is a lot more challenging to communicate. You know, our process of approval for reopening is incredibly complex, and sometimes we've been providing dates or still provide dates much later than we would like to in terms of reopening. However, and one other additional thing is we've had to lay off a large number of staff as well, which makes it challenging. However, with the reopening of the outdoor sport facilities, we're able to recall our permitting staff. So in terms of them specifically, they communicate with the LSOs directly. We have 2 permitting staff full-time, and they're in touch with hundreds of groups on a daily basis. That goes to myself as well as our coordinators. So we do our best to communicate out, but it is a huge challenge, especially with limited staff and the size of Vancouver.
Yeah, appreciate that, Michael. It's the reality of many organizations right now. So with just a couple of minutes left, I'd like to give each of the panelists just an opportunity to say a closing word or two. So Stephanie, not to put you on the spot, but I'll ask you to go first again.
Wow. Patience. It's a challenge. I understand the challenge from your end and your eagerness to get back to sport. And we want that as well, but we want to do it in a safe, planned, logical way. And we've got some challenges, just like you have challenges. We have other organizations we work with. So we're trying. We've got a number of hurdles to jump through, just like you. So hopefully together we move through this. But I know you're, as leaders of your sport group, you probably have to pass that patience message on to your participants, and we're kind of doing that to you as well. So we appreciate it, and hopefully we can move forward in a safe manner.
Appreciate that, Stephanie. Glenn.
Yeah, thanks again. Hopefully we've been able to share some information with everyone, and please reach out to us if you have any more questions. I'm not sure if we can give out our contact information. And we're all learning as we go. Again, we've never, I guess all of us have never been through a situation like this. They don't teach this in university. I think the key is communication. If you can really encourage your groups to communicate with your user groups and continue that communication so they're not left out in the loop of what's not happening. And so if the one thing that I can stress or pass on and really encourage is to engage with your user groups and have constant dialogue or communication with them. I think that will ease a lot of people's angst as we get through this, and we learn on the fly.
Yeah, appreciate that, Glenn. And to you, Michael.
Yeah, and I'll go quick. I see it's almost 11. I see one question. I just want to give a quick answer from my standpoint. It was about the percentage of registration for the fall. We're seeing about 85% return rate, and only 15% of our user groups canceling their permits altogether. So that's a quick one on there. And then just echo the comments, especially Stephanie's, around communication and around patience. It may seem that we are dragging our feet, but we promise to you that we really are doing our best within what we are allowed to do and able to do to return to sports safely. And I just want to emphasize the word safely. I know there's a lot of pressure on everybody, but we're a lot busier than we are during regular operations, and we're doing our best to have everybody come back, because like Jared said, our goal is for people to play sports, not to be sidelined.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. And last word to you, Jared, to close.
I heard that Glenn said that he'll field all questions going forward about return to sport. So you can contact Glenn. No, I'm always here and wanting to support you and the realities that you're in and understand what you're going through. It is challenging on all layers of a return to sports, from the participant to the coach. Club to the provincial bodies that are trying to set this. It's really we want to continue to have this dialogue, and so please continue to reach out. The more questions that we know, the more that we can advocate on your side and try to find the answers. We're not always going to have them right away, but we want to continue to do that. So yeah, please continue to be part of this process with us.
And with that, I'll thank all the panelists for being so willing to jump on this call with us, and to everyone who attended. We had nearly 100 people on the call, so thank you. Have a great weekend, and thanks again for joining us.